From the Iroquois people comes a proverb known as the seventh generation principle. And from military theorists comes a concept known as the generations of warfare. Together, from a principle about sustainability and a concept of war, emerges seventh generation warfare. This is seventh generation warfare, and I'm your current host, John Nelson. In this episode, we'll be looking at one of the things my parents did wrong in raising me. I really don't have too many complaints in how my parents raised me. By and large, I had a great childhood. I'm very fortunate that, if you look at the adverse childhood, what's that called? Adverse childhood score. There's like a series of 10 questions. I might count it like a 0.5, so my childhood was pretty void of any kind of traumatic stuff, but the story I'm going to share with you tonight is one of the things that my parents did that was not beneficial to me and could have had even more damaging second and third order effects that they didn't realize. So, although I take full ownership over all my decisions as an adult, so I'm not blaming them in this episode, I'm trying to highlight how parents have the influence on their children and how simple things can manifest into bigger problems. So this story starts with religious upbringing, and I was raised in the Catholic Church, more or less. My parents, coming from very Catholic families, tried to be good Catholics and bring us to church on Sundays. But there was 4 of us kids and 2 of them, and we really put our foot down, and it often led to them having to bribe us to go to church by promising to get us donuts afterwards. And when I was in church, I'd be allowed to sleep through most of the Mass. And so the discipline around religion wasn't very great. But I went to CCD, which is the Catholic form of Sunday school, and did all the whatever they're called, the ceremonies, First Holy Communion and all that. Now, when I was in CCD, I remember feeling very lost and confused about the religion. The teacher would talk and talk and talk, and none of it seemed to make a whole lot of sense to me. I'd look around at my peers, and they all seemed to be just eating it all up, and that made me feel very isolated in a way. And I'm sure I raised some questions and probably didn't get answers that felt sufficient to me at the time. And so I ended up turning to not paying attention. I stopped caring. I checked out. And for year after year, I would spend my time in CCD boring a hole through my textbook with the pen, just going over and over. Sometimes a diamond, sometimes a circle, sometimes a square, sometimes big, sometimes small. And if you just run over the same spot on a page long enough, it actually cuts through the paper. And so by the end of the season or the year of classes, my textbook would look like Swiss cheese. And it would not be uncommon for me to then go home, and I must have ended in the wintertime sometime, because it would not be uncommon for me to bury my textbook in a snow pile after the last class. I first did this at my house. I buried it in a snow pile, but then I just decided to start burying it at the church. So I imagine when the snow thawed out, somebody there at the church was finding desecrated CCD books, which is kind of funny. I was so unhappy in that place that I took CCD. I still don't know what it means, but I came up with my own meaning of what it means. And I remember I go around the hallways saying Christ caused death. Christ caused death. CCD must mean what it is. And I remember a child, another peer, saying, "Oh, you shouldn't say that." And to me at the time, I was like, well, what they're trying to tell me is if Christ is God, and God is responsible for creation, then he's also responsible for death. So therefore, logically, Christ caused death. I don't know. It's neither here or there. It just shows how I was like water and oil to that place. The point of the story is that before confirmation, we went on a retreat, and there was a motivational speaker, told some sob story, and was very good on the guitar, and had all me and my peers, fully, at his attention with the stories he was telling and all that. I don't know what gives him the qualification to say this, but one of the things he said is God would rather you not believe in him than to be on the fence and pretend to believe. Meaning, don't bear false witness. Like, don't fake it just because you think you should. Like, be honest, And so it was that point on the retreat before confirmation that I decided I didn't believe in God and that I didn't want to get confirmed. And so I went home and told my parents this, and they have their reasons. They encouraged me very strongly to go ahead and get confirmed. And I told them I felt like it would be lying. And they still defend this to today. I talked to them about what I'm telling you right now. I talked to them just a couple months ago about this topic. And they said, well, if you ever changed your mind, it'd be easier to do it now than to try and go through the process later. Or I know for a fact that my mom said something to the effect of you'd give your grandmother a heart attack if you didn't get confirmed, because my grandparents were very religious. So I personally feel there is an aspect of my parents wanting to avoid shame from their parents. And so that's the first order of it, of like how strong the parent-child connection is and how little children want to displease their parents. If I'm actually accurate with this, which my parents would say I'm not, they didn't want to displease their parents. They didn't want to displease their parents so much that they strongly encouraged me to go against my conscience and to get confirmed. I ultimately got confirmed. Now, like many cultures and customs or societies and religions, confirmation is seen as a rite of passage into adulthood. Normally happens around the age of 13. That's when confirmation happens. That's when bar and bat mitzvahs are. Indian, cultures have their rites of passage. A lot of societies have their rites of passage. Now, while my peers were having their rite of passage into the Catholic Church and professing their belief or whatever, I had a separately or different rite of passage. My rite of passage into adulthood was to publicly lie and receive material reward for it. Now, when I mentally realized this, like, I don't know, just last year, that this is what actually happened, that my rite of passage into adulthood, was to publicly lie, it hit me like a load of bricks. And so, yeah, it's not good. I see myself as an honest person, and I think it's because of my honesty I was able to identify that my rite of passage into adulthood was about lying. So, yeah, that's one of the major ways my parents did me wrong. Now, the story doesn't end there. So, if it was just that, it wouldn't be so bad. But it wasn't just that. Years later, I went through high school, went through college. I joined the military. Now, I joined the military as an officer. And coming towards the end of OCS, I thought OCS, Officer Candidate School, was stupid. And I really was doubting whether or not I wanted to do it. Because unlike going enlisted and going to boot camp, like once you sign the paper, like, yeah, I'm going enlisted, I want to go to boot camp, you're their property. They want to keep you, and their only goal is to really shape you. In Officer Candidate School, they're trying to weed you out. They only want to keep the creme de la creme. So my platoon started with like 62 cadets and ended with like 38. So there's a pretty high attrition rate. Anyways, and some of those people were kicked out, some of those people left voluntarily. But at the end of it, you get commissioned, and you have the choice up until you raise your right hand and say the, all the magical words, you have the opportunity to back out. And so my last week of officer candidate school, I was really contemplating, do I really want to do this? And I never really felt that I did. Now, I guess I should have pulled this up ahead of time. So I do solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That part, most people know. There was a lie in that, because I couldn't have possibly, sworn to defend the Constitution. I never even fully read the Constitution, nor fully really understood. I had the Cliff Notes. I kind of had an understanding of what the Constitution was about, but and I think this is the case with most people who swear to defend the Constitution. They probably haven't even read it. But that's not the point I'm looking at. Further down there is, it says, I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation, or purpose of evasion, and that I will faithfully and blah, 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 discharge all duties of office for which I am about to enter. So help me God. Well, one, I didn't believe in God at the time. Now I have a slightly different understanding of God, but so that's a lie too. But the point I'm really looking at here is that without mental reservation, I had tons of mental reservation. I really didn't know if I wanted to do it. Truth be told, I just didn't know what else I was going to do with my life. And so I raised my right hand and I said I had no mental reservations when I in fact did. So would I have been so easy to lie in that context had I not lied, about my confirmation? I don't think so, Again, I take full ownership over all these decisions. It's not ultimately my parents' fault. But setting the groundwork for publicly in front of crowds of people declaring something that isn't actually true, that's the common theme between my confirmation and my commissioning oath. And so luckily my time in the military, I have one of the most ridiculous times in the military, most unique experiences, but those are all stories for another time. Luckily, I never had to kill anyone, although I came extremely, extremely, extremely close to. Now, you could say I would have missed the shot, and it's possible, but the guy was like 50 feet from me. And anyways, I don't need to get into that. The point being is, joining the military, you can easily just set yourself up for extreme moral or spiritual injury that can be hard to overcome. And so I was close enough that I still had to understand that, I had the capacity to kill. I put myself in the position where I was the type of person who would kill an innocent Afghan villager, right? But if we follow the chain back, I think it really does start with me lying about my confirmation. And so that's the point of this episode, is just showing how one thing leads to another, and how, slippery slopes do exist, and how you can justify things to yourself in the time. But unless you keep that strong you stay on the straight and narrow path. You don't lie. You encourage, honesty and integrity all the time. That you allow your children to exercise their will fully, and you do not try to corrupt their will. Very negative things could come from it. So I hope that was an interesting story, that it was somewhat powerful and thought-provoking. I am more mature and more wiser now, and I certainly do not seek to put my children in those sorts of positions, and I hope that you will not either. I hope that you found this interesting. This is 7th Generation Warfare. Have a good night.